Okay, welcome back, everyone. It is the Dragon Plus live stream. I am your host, Bart Carroll, and we have not had a chance to get together in some time. But joining me, as always, Jeremy Crawford, lead designer of the book and rules designer of Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome back, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here. Yeah, we were just saying before the show started, it feels like it's been a lifetime since we had one of these episodes, and several lifetimes since we last did an episode in the office.
Yeah, oh man, yes. I can't even remember when that would have been. And the last time we got together on a live stream at all was before the most recent Unearthed Arcana, which we will get to shortly. But before we do, I know there have been a few other things that have been going on. Notably, D&D Live 2020 took place a couple of weeks ago, and you were involved. How was that?
It was a ton of fun. I got to DM, as you know, for a group of WWE superstars. They were all amazing players, and it just made me want to get to DM for them many more times. And at least I will get to DM again for Xavier Woods, that is WWE superstar Xavier Woods, in our next episode of Acquisitions Incorporated, which we will be doing as a part of PAX Online.
Yes, and we did want to mention that with and right now with social distancing still very much in place. PAX, like many other conventions and get-togethers, has gone virtual, and that still gives us an opportunity to tune in safely and remotely and enjoy the games as an audience member. So good to hear that you'll be dungeon mastering for that at PAX this year.
I will definitely miss the live audience participation, not having a crowd there yelling out green flame, but we'll carry the green flame in our hearts.
I know I just mentioned this before we went live, but as an avid sports fan, I've been following the major league sports and what they're doing to fill that role with games without the audience. And I know for baseball, they're going to experiment with the laugh track style version of adding in fan noise. I watch a lot of boxing, and the other version or take that they're trying is you can log into their app and kind of everyone participates remotely with their sort of audience feedback and however they kind of filter it together in a way that still allows for the dump button, I'm sure. But they're working on it. They're trying. So before we get into the most recent Unearthed Arcana, other things in your area of the world in terms of what I always like to ask, what you're reading, watching, playing yourself.
So the last about month and a half, almost 2 months, what I have mostly been reading is the D&D book we have not yet announced. So I have been in my little gnome workshop, working very hard along with the rest of the team on our next major book, which is coming together very, very well. So most of what I've been reading is the material we are writing.
Yes.
And I also haven't been playing much, although actually just last night, after we hit a pretty big milestone with the book, I was able to breathe a little bit and finally start playing my copy of Persona 5 Royal. I played Persona 5 back when it originally came out. I loved it. And Persona 5 Royal, if you're not familiar, is the same game, but even longer and with all sorts of new features. And I'm only like 90 minutes into it, and I'm already loving
it. Speaking of products, I will say that there were 2 announced today of interest and relation to Dungeons and Dragons over on Hasbro Pulse and other online retailers you can find. Adventure Begins is one of the new Dungeons and Dragons board games. that was announced today, and also Cutie Marks and Dragons, which is the My Little Ponies Dungeons and Dragons crossover set. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at those, you can head on over to Hasbro Pulse, and both of those are now listed. So
Yeah, see, this is me going like, why don't I have these My Little Ponies?
they are as anticipatedly adorable. There are 5 of them, and each one sort of represents a Dungeons and Dragons class. So they are quite adorable. They're cute.
I am actually searching for them right now. I'm like, why? I wasn't kidding. Why do I not have these My Little Ponies?
Yeah, there we go. So I'll also mention.
Oh my gosh!
Yes,
they are so cute.
Pelham, I should have sent you an image of those, knowing they were going to go live. But yeah, for everyone tuning in, go ahead, hit Hasbro Pulse, and you should be able to see them there. In addition, I will mention we haven't had a chance to get together on a stream in some time. I have always appreciated the folks that have taken time out of their day live to tune in. We are running a very quick giveaway. The winner is going to get a copy of Lost Laboratory of Qualish, which Jeremy and I had discussed in depth a couple of years ago. My gosh, at this point. So I'll be glad to purchase the winner a copy of that, since the proceeds still do benefit Children Miracle Network hospitals. So thanks as everyone for tuning in. And perhaps without further ado, let's talk about one of my favorite topics, because I just got out of my rehab boot and I am fiddling with my rehab stretchy band because we are going to talk about Feats today.
Oh my gosh! So you just dealt 3d10 psychic damage to me with that pun.
I've been sitting on that for a while, but I don't think you're going to be talking about the same feats that I am. What are the? That's my segue. What are feats in the context of Dungeons and Dragons?
So feats in D&D, and that's spelled F-E-A-T. They are a way for people to customize their character. They are an optional rule. They're in the player's handbook. In the same chapter where you find the multi-classing optional rule. And both of those rules give you methods to take your character, who could be a member of any class, and tweak them in ways that make your character unusual in some way. So I view feats and multi-classing together as a way to sort of go off the grid and explore character concepts and character capabilities that are not confined to a particular class. It's also important to point out that each of these optional rules stands on its own. So you could have a group that uses multi-classing but not feats. You could have another group that uses feats and not multi-classing. You could have a group that uses neither of them, or you could have a group that uses both. I know it's also true that in many D&D groups, you will have individual players, even though the DM might have given everyone the option of using both multi-classing and feats, individual players will opt in or opt out on their own. So you might have, one person at the table who is multi-classing, another, maybe a couple people who are using feats, and then maybe 2 people at the table who aren't using either. The thing is, we designed 5th edition D&D to support all of those combinations. So if you're ever concerned as a group, like, well, if one person uses feats, does everyone have to use feats? The answer is no. We made it so that these 2 options are truly modular in that you can sort of activate them or deactivate them as you like on a character by character basis. and let really each person pursue the kind of character customization that matches their tastes. I get asked sometimes, this was something we got asked before 5th edition was released, and it's a question that has come up over the years since, and in fact, it's a question I've seen on Twitter just within the last few days, and that is, why not just make feats a required part of the game?
Mm.
And there's a very good reason why we don't do that. And that's because we discovered in our design of 5th edition, there are many D&D players who don't want to use them. That in fact, many D&D players like just the simple choice of, I have my class, I get my class features, and that's all I want. And those players really lean into role-playing choices, how they use their abilities, their character's background, and other elements of the character to really dig into the distinctiveness of who their character is. That said, we know there are also players who love the mechanical levers that things like feats and multi-classing give them, which is why we made sure these options are in the game. But we knew that there were enough people who essentially wanted to be able to just pick their class and be done, that we did not want to force feats into the core game, but yet we still support them in the core so that those who want them can have them.
Which, if you're coming from a different edition or a different system entirely, might work a little bit differently in 5th edition, but it seems like it's an approach that seems to be working for a lot of folks, the modularity of it all.
Absolutely. We know that in terms of player statistics, there are more players who don't use feats than who do.
Hmm.
Yet again, we know that the people who use them really like using them, which is why we had this most recent Unearthed Arcana where we introduced some more feats. Because even though we're not going to sort of open the floodgates and fill the game with feats, we want to make sure we are providing some really juicy options for the people who do like feats. And again, so enter this Unearthed Arcana. And it's been a number of years since we've done an Unearthed Arcana focused on feats. So I thought this is a good time for us to explore some new options.
Yes. So speaking of which, for folks that might not have had a chance, the latest Unearthed Arcana is simply entitled Feats. You can find it now on the homepage of the D&D website or in the articles section. In addition, I'll also call out, it's been out for about a week now. I think we dropped it on July 13th. So there is a separate survey, which is also live and ready for user feedback. If you've had a chance to look at the feats, play through the feats and have thoughts, please do take the time if you have it to fill out the survey and let us know your thoughts on the material.
Yeah, because those surveys that we post with each Unearthed Arcana article, usually a week or two after the article was originally posted, those surveys are the best way for people to give us their feedback. We also, of course, when we have time, look at Twitter, Reddit, and other locations on the internet to see what people are saying. But the place where we go through all of the feedback is in that survey. So anyone watching, if you have thoughts you want to make sure we see about these feats or really any other Unearthed Arcana, the survey that gets posted about a particular UA is the best way to reach us. Because we go through it meticulously to make sure we are really understanding what the D&D community is thinking about whatever new option it is that we've presented. Now, here in this set of feats, we really hit a pretty broad range of different themes, different game mechanics. The through line in these different feats is that they're all ways to customize your character in a meaningful way. And that's the through line really for all good feats in 5th edition. They need to customize your character in a way that is meaningful. And one of our design goals is that a feat should have a chance to manifest in play every session. Not necessarily like if it's a combat-oriented feat, not necessarily every single round in combat, but we want to make sure that a feat has enough heft that it's likely to show up in play at least, once or twice every time you play D&D. We have that as a North Star because we want to make sure we don't design feats that are so corner case that you take this thing, which should be character defining, and then go session after session after session and never actually see it manifest. We also have to make sure that feats are nice and chunky and have some heft, because if you take a feat, it means, unless you're a variant human in the player's handbook, it means you've given up an ability score increase to take it. And an ability score increase is remarkably good. And so a feat that you take in its place also needs to be very good. And you'll see sometimes in these feats, not only the ones here, but also the ones in the player's handbook, as well as in the feats that we published in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, occasionally a feat will still give you part of an ability score increase. That's usually a sign that we felt the feat's effects on their own were not quite good enough to justify taking the feat. And so we give the feat a lift in terms of its game mechanics heft by putting into it an ability, at least a partial ability score increase. So you sort of get halfway there when you take the particular feat.
It is a careful choice. I tend to be one that goes with the ability score modifier most of the time, but if I do have especially if I have a particular character concept in mind that I want to flesh out with feats, it's nice to have that option. So why don't we take a look over at the feats? We've got I've got the PDF right here, and Pelham's got the pages up as well. So let's see, it looks like we gave, I'm a quick count, I believe it's about 15 feats that appear in the Unearthed Arcana.
16, I think.
16.
Yeah.
All right. Well, where should we begin? Should we leave it to chat, or do you want to start running through them as far as where they came from, how they developed, what their intent was?
Yeah. How about I do a flyover, and then we can take questions from the audience.
Yes, good point. If folks do have questions, please do put it into chat. Please do preface it with question. If we do not get to it this time, we do compile the questions and do look to get to them in future live streams. So taking a look now at the material, let's have at it.
All right, let's start at the top with Artificer Initiate. So this feat is the sibling to the Magic Initiate feat that's in the player's handbook. And this is specifically for anyone who wants to just get a little flavorful dip into the Artificer, allowing you to learn a cantrip from the Artificer spell list, a first level spell, and you also gain proficiency with a type of artisan's tools of your choice, and then you can use those tools as a spellcasting focus, which of course is a big part of the Artificer's shtick. Now, one of the things about this feat, and this is true of several of the feats in the player's handbook, and it's also true of several of the feats in this document, you can also take this feat if you're an Artificer. So let's say you're an Artificer and you're just like, I just really want an extra cantrip. I want a free casting each day of one of my Artificer first level spells. And you want, even more proficiencies, you could also take this feat. It's been tailored for the non-Artificer, but I just want to make it clear that even an Artificer could take it. And again, that's going to be a theme I'll come back to with several of the feats in this document. Because feats, remember, are meant to be flexible. They're meant to give people the ability to fine-tune their character's capabilities in ways that classes don't typically allow. So after the Artificer Initiate, we get into Chef, which is a delightful feat. This one was designed by Tamor Raymond. And I should say about the sort of design process of this document, what I did is I designed 5 of the 16 feats as examples, then went to some of the designers on staff, 4 of them, and said, all right, now please each of you design a couple. And so the group then designed, those 4 people designed the other 9 feats to go with the 5 I had designed. Tamor sort of wrangled their work, and we gathered it together. And so we ended up with this bunch designed by me, Tamor, Dan Dillon, Ben Petrosor, and Ari Levitch. And then we all work together as a group to develop them into the state that you see here. And that's typical for us, that we will often sort of have an initial design gathering, set a direction. Each of us will then write our portion of it, and then we come back and develop it together as a group. And as a part of that process, Chef made it through, which I'm delighted about, because who doesn't like being able to make tasty treats?
I agree. This one speaks to me. This is just apropos. Tamor, did I ever tell you the story of how I met him originally?
Mm-mm.
So I don't know if you know this, but this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. He would volunteer when we were doing the Extra Life live streaming, especially for the all-day marathon streaming. He was, I believe, at university still, was interested in working at Wizards of the Coast, and just came all day and volunteered his efforts here as part of Extra Life. So I was super excited when he sort of joined the department.
Yeah.
We had a quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. If we have a question.
We do. We have a question on Chef in particular. So before you get into it, and the details might answer some of this, it talks about the work that a chef is doing during short rest, long rest. Is the work done by the chef strenuous or light activity? So i.e., do they need to make cookies while the rest of the party takes a short rest? Or can they make the cookies during a short rest? Does it cancel their short rest, or is it sort of at the same time?
So the intent is that those treats have to be made during a long rest, or as a part of an hour of work that's not a short rest. Because you'll see the previous option is the short rest one, and then the final option is the long rest one, or the hour of non-restful work. And that's a great example of the kind of thing we can make clearer if this feat makes it through the feedback process and makes its way into a book. We would definitely want to clarify that, of whether you could do this during a short rest or not. The intent of this version is no, you cannot. And again, that intent becomes a little clearer when you compare that final benefit to the one right before it that talks about being something you do as part of a short rest. And so that short rest one is sort of like the Bard's Song of Rest, where you make everyone's healing during a rest more beneficial because of the meal that you make for them. Whereas that final bullet lets you make portable goodies that people can munch on to get temporary hit points. And it's good to remember that temporary hit points do not necessarily represent health per se. They can represent all sorts of things. They can represent strength of will. They can represent force fields. In this case, we're just imagining you feel great because my goodness, was that muffin delicious. And And I have eaten pumpkin muffins that I swear have given me temporary hit points. They were that good. Maybe a few almond scones have also given me temporary hit points.
Yes, there are. I will also call out, I don't know if this is good or bad, but there is a number of bakeries that now offer delivery and curbside pickup. That's pretty dangerous. So
Yeah, I do not need that in this very sedentary quarantine. All right. We also have in this document 3 feats, the first of which is called Crusher, that each speak to a different damage type. The Crusher feat speaks to bludgeoning damage. We have later in the document the Piercer feat that speaks to piercing damage. And then finally, we have the Slasher feat that speaks to, you guessed it, slashing damage. I read this name, by the way, and always think that, no, this is not the Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees feat. It's not that kind of slasher. These are each meant to speak to the person who wants to be very good at one of these 3 traditional types of physical damage. We know that people who are into feats often want there to be weapon-oriented feats. And in fact, a number of years ago, we did an Unearthed Arcana that had weapon-oriented feats. Those feats didn't actually test particularly well. And one of the issues that they had is that they were too specific. They ended up being sort of going so far down a rabbit hole on a particular weapon or type of weapon that they could very easily result in a situation where you pick the feat, but it turned out in a particular session you didn't actually want to use that type of weapon, or you got a magic item from the Dragon's Treasure Trove that wasn't that kind of weapon, but it was so good you wanted to use it, and now suddenly your feat doesn't work with it. With all of that in mind, and with the desire to still create something that would speak to weapon use, I urge the team to explore a set of feats that would have broader utility, that would work with a variety of weapons. And so we landed on these feats related to damage types, because there are many different types of piercing weapons. There are many different types of bludgeoning weapons, and there are many different types of slashing weapons. So if you pick one of these feats, let's say you pick the piercing weapon one, well, that's going to work not only with the arrows you fire from your bow, but that's also going to work if you suddenly decide to wield a spear. So there's still going to be, it's not going to work with every weapon that you pick up, but it's going to work with a broad range of weapons. And so again, you have more options here. And this was also a chance to explore little sort of add-on effects that are nods toward what it might feel like to get clobbered by one of these damage types. This is why, the bludgeoning damage one can move you with this idea of you getting, crushed or smashed and hurled around. The piercing damage one lets you re-roll one of the attack's damage dice, and this is speaking to, if you're getting pierced by something, the odds are it's really going to hurt. And then the slashing damage one lets you reduce the person's speed. The thought here is this is basically a very distant nod at things like, hamstringing somebody, slashing their Achilles tendon, which is horrifying. But that's why there is this speed reduction idea, that if you were getting enough cuts, you would very likely be slowed down. So these are just some things we're experimenting with here, just fun add-on effects for the person who picks one of these feats, but also because we know, even if, let's say, you're kitted out with all sorts of things that will deal piercing damage, you're still going to end up with situations where this feat isn't going to help you, which is why, remember how I mentioned earlier that some feats get a little lift with the partial ability score increase? That's why all 3 of these feats have the ability score increase in them as well. because we know, as broad as these are, you could still end up in a situation where the feat might not help you enough in a particular session for you to feel good about having taken that feat.
So here's a question that sort of came in regarding all three, Slasher, Pierce, and Crusher. Jappleton asked, is it intended for those feats to be missing the weapon keyword? Or is the intent that, no, these are still inherent feats to your weapon use?
So we very intentionally did not use the word weapon here. In fact, the word appeared in at least one of the feats in one of our earlier drafts. And we cut it because we want these to have broad use. What that means is if you happen to have one of these feats and you cast a spell that let's say you have Piercer, and you cast a spell that deals piercing damage, this feat will work with that spell. And that's an intentional part of the feat, to again reward you for making the resource commitment in your character building to a feat. Because again, picking a feat is a big deal because you've given up your full ability score increase for that level when you choose a feat.
Yeah, similar question had come in if it applies to unarmed attacks, ranged weapons, spell attacks that do those kinds of damage types.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is one of those cases where it is intended to be as generous as the wording implies, where it says, when you hit a creature with an attack that deals bludgeoning damage, you get this benefit. So if you hit somebody with an unarmed strike that deals bludgeoning damage, you get this benefit. And that's very intentional. The only requirements you have to meet for, I'm looking at the Crusher feat, for that second bullet is you have to hit a creature with an attack that deals bludgeoning damage. Full stop. So that could be a spell, it could be your fist, it could be a club, it could be a table leg. Any of those things would work with this.
Yeah, it's any other fans of Street Fighter 2, it reminds me a little bit of E Honda and his 100-handed punch. If you combine it with a monk's flurry of blows in a nice way.
Yeah.
All right. So there we have Crusher, Piercer, and Slasher.
That's right. So which takes us next to Eldritch Adept. This feat allows you to learn an Eldritch Invocation option from the Warlock class, even if you're not a Warlock. And this feat is in the same family of feats that a few of the feats in the Player's Handbook are in. I have my Player's Handbook open over here. Feats like Magic Initiate, Martial Adept. These are feats that let you snatch a little bit of a class's goodness and enjoy it, whether you are a member of that class or not. Some people online will refer to this as multi-classing light, and that's an apt description of it, and that is an intentional part of the design. But with this very important qualification, remember that a member of the class can also take this. So you can't multi-class into your own class. A non-warlock can take this Eldritch Adept feat and gain an Eldritch Invocation from the Warlock, but a Warlock can also take this to get an extra Eldritch Invocation. And that is very much an intentional part of this design. Because this is a great way in this feat for some character where you want them to just have some little magical ability. And we design Eldritch Invocations in the Warlock almost like sort of little magical superpowers. And this feat is a way for any spellcasting character to gain access to those abilities. But again, it's also a way for the Warlock who might be having a hard time squeezing all of the Eldritch Invocations they want, into the limited number of Eldritch Invocations they get from the class. Well, this feat gives you a way to get another one. And also this feat gives you flexibility, because this feat lets you, every time you level up, change which Eldritch Invocation you got from it. So if you have buyer's remorse about the Eldritch invocation you picked, well, when you level up, you can pick another one. The key
I just
here.
scrambled to
go
get
ahead.
my players. I was just saying I scrambled back to get my player's handbook to see the applications for that as well.
There are some really not only useful Eldritch invocations, but also very flavorful Eldritch invocations that you can use to explore a variety of different magical character concepts. Now, one thing I do want to point out in this feat is the sentence that says, if the invocation has a prerequisite, you can choose that invocation only if you're a warlock and only if you meet the prerequisite. So that means if the Eldritch invocation has a prerequisite of any kind, whether it's a level requirement or something else, only a warlock can pick that invocation using this feat.
So for example, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, for example, if the requisite is that requires a warlock spell slot, then in that case, it would require a warlock to be able to use it?
Well, again, what this feat is saying is it actually doesn't matter what the prerequisite is. If an invocation has a prerequisite of any kind, only a warlock can take that invocation.
Okay, all right, gotcha.
You can't, if you're not a warlock and you take this feat, you can only use this feat to pick an Eldritch invocation that has no prerequisite. Otherwise, Eldritch invocations with prerequisites we designed only for warlocks, whereas the ones that lack prerequisites are fine for non-warlocks to snatch.
I have a vested interest because I play a lot of warlocks.
Well, if this feat makes it into print, this will give you even more flexibility with how you build your warlock. As well as giving flexibility to people who want a little bit of warlock goodness in their non-warlock. So next up, we have Fey Touched. This feat gives you a partial ability score increase, and then it also, to help create a character who has a little bit of Fey magic, it gives you the Misty Step spell, because many Fey creatures in D&D have some kind of teleportation ability or other transportation ability of some kind. And then you also get to pick a first level spell from the divination or enchantment school. So again, this is just a fun, simple way to give a character some Fey feeling if your character's race or class isn't already giving you that feeling. This then leads to the Fighting Initiate. So here we have another feat that is about getting some of the goodness that's in a class. This feat lets you pick one of the fighting style options in the fighter class. Fighting styles are already basically feat-like in their design. They're very chunky, to use the word I used earlier. And when I say that, by the way, that's a good thing. Again, it has heft. It has meat on its bones. And just like with Eldritch Adept, not only can a non-fighter take this feat, but a fighter can also take this feat. So this is, again, one of those feats that is meant to give you sort of light multi-classing if you're not a member of the class. But if you are a member of the class, it lets you get some more of that good thing that you already like. And just like with Eldritch Adept, this feat lets you, whenever you gain a level, change the option you picked if you had buyer's remorse. Mm-hmm. Everyone watching, if you watched our talk about the class feature variant UA that we released a number of months ago, you'll remember that buyer's remorse was a design theme then as well, that a number of the variants were about letting people change their mind later to fit their character concept better as their character grows. Which it's not only about avoiding buyer's remorse, but there's also a much more sort of positive angle to it. And that is being able to model that people change. None of us, even in the real world, are the same year to year. When I think back, just to myself, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I've changed in many ways, and giving people the ability to change their D&D character really gets at this, that people evolve, that some things we were good at in the past fall away. Like, I used to be able to play the piano. If you put me in front of a piano today, oh boy. And that's why we are more and more including this kind of thing, where if you want, you can change certain aspects of what your character is good at. Your character has decided to focus on something else.
I definitely concur. My high school trombone skills have definitely decreased, but I can now complete my taxes on my own. So there you go.
Yes, exactly. Oh, but playing a musical instrument would be more fun.
I don't know. I kind of like finding my all the things I can get out of my tax returns. Plus, it's a much quieter hobby for everyone else in the household.
That's true. Although, Art, you might need professional help if filling out your taxes is your hobby. You might want to find it enjoyable. You might want to explore this marvelous hobby called Dungeons and Dragons instead.
Well, I will say that the first edition AD&D character sheets helped set me on that path. Those were a complex beast, to say the least.
Yeah. So after fighting Initiate, we have the Gunner feat. This feat was sort of in our minds because of Eberron coming out, and D&D has always had characters in it in different settings that end up having some gun-like object that they employ, whether it's magical or non-magical. And the Dungeon Master's Guide, as this feat points out, has rules on firearms. So this feat is a way for your character to get proficiency with using firearms, and then it gives you several other benefits. It's a pretty niche feat, but for the person who really wants to be a gun-toting character, well, this feat gives you very direct access to that part of the rules. We also have Metamagic Adept. Here's again one of these feats that lets you dip a toe into a particular class. In this case, the class is the Sorcerer. And here, the person who takes this feat, whether they are a non-sorcerer or a sorcerer, gets to learn 2 metamagic options from the Sorcerer class. And then you also gain actually use those metamagic options that you selected. And if you're a sorcerer picking this feat, you get those 2 extra sorcery points. There is, however, the specification that these 2 extra sorcery points can be spent only on metamagic. So this, as stated in the name of this feat, this is all about metamagic and giving a little bit of that ability to manipulate spells, even to a non-sorcerer. But because this feat's sorcery point pool of exactly 2 is so limited, there's no risk of a non-sorcerer taking this feat and in any way outshining the flexibility the sorcerer has, because the sorcerer has a much deeper pool of points to spend on metamagic and can therefore manipulate their own magic in ways that a non-sorcerer could not. But again, this is a way to get a taste of it or to get more of it if you are a sorcerer. I'm going to skip over Piercer because we talked about the 3 damage type feats. So we have Poisoner. Poisoner has several fun uses. One of them is it speaks to the fantasy of the character who brews poisons. But there is also a very juicy part of this feat, even for somebody who has no interest in having their character brew poisons, and that is its very first benefit. When you make a damage roll, you ignore resistance to poison damage. So if a person has a character who likes to cast spells that deal poison damage, or who has class features that deal poison damage, you could take this feat, and this feat would allow all of those things to bypass resistance to poison. Just meaning you are just so good at poisoning things that you just go right past the resistance that they have to this type of damage.
That was the question I was going to have, was the story sort of take on that. I was assuming something along those lines. You might have a general resistance to poison, but I am so good, I can figure out exactly what you are vulnerable against.
Yep. Now, it's important to see here, though, this does not allow you to bypass immunity to poison. So if a creature just simply cannot be damaged by poison, this feat does not allow you to bypass that. But again, if a creature is resistant to poison, this feat just turns that right off.
I can see a nice synergy with this and the chef feat.
No, don't eat those treats.
I made these for you, and I made these other ones.
They've been sitting on the counter for too long. Don't eat them.
I left them in the sun.
So we also have the practiced expert feat. Now, this is actually a nod to the skill feats that we released in Unearthed Arcana a few years ago. Those feats, like the weapon feats I mentioned, struggled a little bit in feedback, partly again because they were so specific. And also one of the challenges for us is anytime we start making things like feats for everything in a group, so in this case, skills, or you could also imagine tools, it then means they all have to be good and be satisfactory to the audience, or none of them get published. That's always the problem with anytime we try to create coverage for an entire group, is they all rise and fall together, because we're not going to publish, well, we have the medicine feat, but none of the other ones made it. It's just not satisfying. But we know that people want some way in the feat system to just make themselves exceptionally good at something. And so we created this feat that is much broader. It lets you pick any one skill or tool. So essentially it works with everything. And then you essentially get what we call expertise with that proficiency. And expertise means simply you get to double your proficiency bonus when you use the chosen proficiency. And we even throw in half an ability score increase to boot. So this is a tasty feat for somebody, for instance, who just wants to be outstanding at a particular skill or with a particular tool. We also have the Shadowtouched feat, which is the companion to the Fey Touched feat. Just like that other feat, this gives you some magic that is themed to a particular plane. Fey Touched was themed to the Feywild, and this one is themed to the Shadowfell. We then have shield training. The game already has one feat in the player's handbook that will give you proficiency with shields. It's called Moderately Armored. But it doesn't really speak to some of the other things you might want to be able to do with the shield. And even though we have a shield master feat, there are still things that even that feat doesn't speak to. So we have now the shield training feat. This gives you part of an ability score increase. You gain proficiency with shields. You can don or doff shields now as part of your free object interaction. Many people don't realize that in the game, you actually need to spend your action to kind of get a shield situated properly on your arm to use it to defend yourself. This feat lets you ignore that. Basically, you can don or doff that shield as part of your action or your move. And then finally, we've also made it so that if you're a spellcaster and you have this feat, you can channel your spells through the shield. This is for particular character concepts where a person might like to imagine. You can imagine an abjurer wizard. Abjuration is all about protecting somebody who blasts all of their protective abjuration magic through a shield. So we have two more. We have Tandem Tactician. This, to me, I think of this as the sneaky feat of the bunch, because it's very subtle. If you're not familiar with the ins and outs of our action system, reading a feat that says you can use the help action as a bonus action, and then it has some further benefits, might seem kind of lackluster. And a person might wonder, well, should this also include a partial ability score increase?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone listening to me who knows what the help action does, though, realizes this feat is crazy good. It might even be too good. And that's why we're sending it out to playtest.
Right.
Because what the help action allows you to do is to give your buddies advantage on attack rolls as well as on other checks. So a person who has this can, just as a bonus action, potentially every round basically be like, you get advantage, and you get advantage, and you get advantage. So this we created for the person who really wants to lean into being a tactical help to their companions. And we know there are a number of people who really love this kind of character concept, and that's what this feat is all about.
I'm looking in chat right now. There are a lot of folks finding the synergies with Tandem Tactician.
Oh no, it is crazy good. Yeah. So finally, we have Tracker, and this is for the person who wants a little bit of sort of taste of the wilderness and a little bit of the ranger, where you get a wisdom increase, you learn the Hunter's Mark spell, and you also have advantage on all of your wisdom survival checks to track creatures. Now, one thing that this feat specifies, and in fact, attentive readers will see all of the feats in this document that involve spellcasting specify this, and that is, if the feat teaches you a spell, you not only get the free casting of that spell that the feat gives you, but you can also use your spell slots, if you have spell slots, to cast that spell as well. Meaning, you aren't just getting that sort of raw power bump of, I get a free spell each day, but you're also getting an increase in versatility because you now have another option for what you spend your spell slots on. And that's one of those things where if we were to, so turn back the clock and dig into a spell like Magic Initiate in the player's handbook, we would have been clearer about that and made that a part of the design then as well. And someone listening might wonder, well, then why give, if that feat doesn't have it, in the player's handbook, why give it to these new feats? Our philosophy is not to inhibit the good design of newer material because of things we didn't think to do in the past. In other words, the game needs to be able to evolve. And if we've thought of a better way of doing something, we're going to do it. And we do that knowingly, and we do our best to keep it balanced so that it can coexist with other options. But again, at the same time, we don't allow basically, well, because we didn't think of it in 2013. Well, we can't ever do it. It's the game. The game has got to be able to move forward, and
Sure.
and you see that in things like this Unearthed Arcana.
Oh, well, my goodness. You managed it. We got through all the 15, 16 feats in the most recent Unearthed Arcana. I am delighted. I am even more delighted that my internet did not crash out. Yes, knock on wood, for the entirety of this week's live stream. It's as always a 50-50 shot, so that's great to hear. Really quickly, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. I did want to give a quick congratulations. It looks like Trumber28 did win the giveaway. So if you can get in touch with the moderators with your contact information, I'll be glad to send across the prize as soon as possible. And thanks to everyone that has been sending in questions throughout the entirety of today's live stream as well. There's quite a few that we still need to touch upon. I'll be compiling these and sending these over to Jeremy's attention immediately.
And we should try to have an episode soon and answer those questions.
Yes. So yes, for folks that are still listening here and you still have some questions on your mind, we might be close to the top of the hour, but throw them into chat as soon as you can so that we can get them compiled here. Yes, that was the first question that came in. Are you going to answer questions?
And everyone, please do remember to fill out the survey on the Wizards of the Coast website to let us know what you think about this collection of feats.
All right. Well, there we have it. Yes, we'll compile these questions. We'll schedule another opportunity so that we can have Jeremy back on so that we can go through the questions. This was our initial opportunity to at least have him take a look at the Unearthed Arcana material itself, talk through the design considerations, and as always, of course, encourage folks, please do take a look at the Unearthed Arcana material. And please do complete the survey, as you mentioned. Very essential for us to get feedback in that regard. So thank you as always. Before we tune out here, Jeremy, it's been a pleasure. So thank you for spending an hour out of your busy day with us. I know you're going back to reading of potential future material, as you mentioned at the top of the hour.
Yes. We have to be very careful not to say what it is.
Thanks as always to our followers, subscribers, of course to our moderators. Thanks to Pelham for running the show here. He's hidden in the back side of things here, but he's been listening to my really bad dad jokes this whole time. So, and of course, all of our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in live. It's greatly appreciated. As always these days, I will certainly encourage everyone continue playing Dungeons and Dragons. Please do so safely, remotely, if as need be. There's plenty of tools and resources still available. If you go to the D&D website, the Play at Home, Stay at Home initiative is earmarked there with tools and resources and material, many of which is free or low cost or pay what you want. So please do take advantage of that these days. All right, we are at about 2 o'clock, so we are going to say goodbye and thanks again, and we'll be in touch shortly.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.